Hi, I'm Debbie and welcome to Book and Bujo, where I talk about all things books, bullet journals, and stationery. Today is my long overdue July wrap-up. So welcome to all who are new and welcome back to those who have been here before. I'm so glad you have joined me today. And as always, I do chapter my videos, so if you want to skip to specific books or just don't want to hear the stats, then go ahead and skip forward. If not, let's get into some stats. So my average rating for July went up, which is great. It was a 4.2. Awesome. So that means I had more 5 stars and a little bit more 4 stars for the month. So that's a win. So in July, I had a 0 1-star, 0 2-star. I had 3 3-star, 9 4-star, and 3 5-star books. So that was so nice. Because last month, I think I only had 1, maybe 2 5-star. So it was really nice to see that bump up a little bit. So I read 15 books, which was a total of 5,436 pages, and I listened to just under 162 hours of audiobooks. So that is down from the month before, but it's a little more closer to normal. I think I typically read 10 to 15 books a month on a normal basis. Of course, April and August are a little different because that's the magical readathon, so we should have a whole lot of books in there. But they're usually smaller books, so the book count is up, but the page count is, it's still up, but not as proportionate to the amount of books I read because they're smaller. All right, so I didn't read any children's books this month. I read 1 middle grade, 4 young adult, 2 new adult, and 8 adult books. Definitely gravitating more towards adult books now. I like my long, chunky fantasies, so those are typically adult books. Not always, but typically. So for format this month, I read all novels. No short stories, no novellas, no poems, nothing like that. July was just novels. I did start 3 series, but I also continued 7 different series, so that was great. I didn't complete any, but I did make progress on 7 different series. I also didn't vary myself much on genres. I read 1 classic, 1 mystery, and 13 fantasy. I usually try and get a few more genres in there, but I just was in a fantasy mood, and of course what comes up with the TBR-opoly, you get what you get sometimes. So luckily for me, it was all fantasy. So I did get 5 books from the library. I borrowed 6 of them, and then I owned 3 of the books that I read. So not a huge chunk down in my owned TBR, but at least I did get to some. So I did listen to 4 audiobooks and I read 2 ebooks. I didn't read any physical books this month alone, just physically, but I did have the other 9 books were mixed media, so it was a mix of either audiobook and ebook or audiobook and physical book. So in that breakdown was 2 audio and ebook combinations, and then 7 of those 9 were audiobook and a physical book, which was nice because I got a whole bunch of them from my library, and it's nice to have that to read along with as I listen to it. So publication dates weren't as varied either. So I did read 1 from 1951, that was my classic. I read 3 that were from 1992, which most of those, of course, are the Discworld books. I had 1 each from 2008 and 2009 and 2017, so there's a huge jump there. So I've been reading a lot more current books. And I had 3 books from 2018, which was kind of interesting. 1 each from 2020, 2021, and 2022, and then 2 books from 2023. So it's weird reading like books from this year. I don't typically do that, so it's kind of fun. All right, so that was my stats. Let's get into the books. So I'm currently on a Sprints with Gia book roast for the Magical Readathon. So let's see if I can finish getting through all of these books before the sprint is up. All right, so my first roll was an odd card, and that was to read the next in a series. And for that, I read Toll the Hounds by Stephen Erickson, and that is the 8th book in Malazan Book of the Fallen. That whole series is amazing, and this book is probably I don't know if it's a new favorite, but it's right up there. I think it's done really well. There's the complexity of the series is starting to make more sense, like everything's starting to come together and you're able to kind of fit a lot of the pieces together. So all the work of reading through all of the other books and keeping track of characters and figuring out who's who and the plot lines of the different races and countries and all of that are starting to come together, and you're really starting to get it. Like, everything was enjoyable up until now, but now you get to add the enjoyment and the understanding. And Bug and Teahall is still, I have to say, my favorite characters of the series. They don't come in until a little bit later in the series, but absolutely my favorites. Okay, so my second role was to read a book on my 23 and 2023 list, and for that I read, you can see, Lore, and that is by Alexandra Bracken, and I really enjoyed that book. So Toll of the Hounds I gave 4.5 stars. Lore I also gave 4.5 stars, and I thought it was just really enjoyable. I kind of knew the premise going in, but I thought the character development was really good. I thought that the plot was decent. I think the pacing fit very well in the book, and you got enough information with still being able to try and figure things out and have that, intrigue in there. And so of course we're following the main characters, Lore and her best friend, and realizing that there's a 7-day battle where the children of the gods are able to fight the gods on more equal footing, because the older gods, have lost their powers, and if they kill the older god, then they themselves become one of the new gods. Lore has been hiding herself away so that no one knows where she is, but of course Athena finds her, and she has to decide whether she is going to bind her fate to Athena or not. I thought everything was done really well. I loved the writing style. I thought it was really easy to read. The audiobook was great. The narration was really good. I thought it was done really well. And the arch enemies and the nemesis and everything was great. I loved all the different finding out some of the backstory. The world building was great. Of course, there's a typical magic system where you have the powers that the gods have. So yes, I would give that one 4.5 stars, and if you can get a hold of the audiobook, I thought it was done really well and it was really easy to listen to. And I loved Lore and her best friend and the dynamics they had with the gentleman that took them in as kind of a foster father, and the way that came about, the relationship they had, and then some of the twists and turns that come throughout the book. I thought somewhat predictable. There may have been a couple that were predictable, like you kind of hope it happens, but it may not have happened that way. And others you're just like, wait, what? So I thought it was really well done. Next was another odd card, and that was to read Anything You Want. And so for that I read The Whispering Dark, and that is by Kelly Andrew, and I enjoyed it. So I did give it 4 stars. It was a very low 4 stars, so it's probably closer to 3.75, but a 4 star. I thought overall it was enjoyable, it was entertaining, I thought it was interesting. There could have been more, like it could have gone a little deeper. It would have been nice to have just a little more out of it, I think. So the characters, I think, were developed well, but they could have had a little more depth. We could have gotten a little bit more from them, a little more growth, a little more information. The plot was interesting. I mean, I think you got just enough information that it made it enjoyable, but it could have been an amazing book if we had just gotten just a little bit more out of it. It was lacking just a little bit, but not enough to drop it down. So it was still a 4 star. I still totally enjoyed it. I loved the characters, but wanted just a little bit more at the end. Okay, so my next read was an even, and that was a 5-star prediction, And for that, I read Best Served Cold by Jill Abercrombie, and this is a standalone novel. So it is considered book number 4 in the First Law world. So you read the First Law trilogy, and then you would read this one, because it's basically set in the same world, different characters. All right, so the family got up and was making noise, so I had to pause and come back, and Walter's decided to join me. We're redoing the carpet in my office, and so it's basically just plywood right now, and he's not liking that. So he's taking some comfort in the lap. All right, so back to where we were. So 5-star prediction, and that was Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, 4th book in the First Law world, and totally different characters. I think there's some familiar names in there. I think it's 10 years later, so there's a lot of familiarity with the world and some of the names. Oh, I think he wants to get behind me. Okay. There we go. Let's move you up a little bit now. Okay, that's a little better. Familiar with the world, familiar with some of the characters that are mentioned. There may be 1 or 2 that we kind of know from before a little bit, have mention of. Following a woman whose brother was killed, and they tried to kill her and leave her for dead, and she survives and is now out for revenge. She basically wants everyone that was in the room when her brother died and they tried to kill her. She wants all of them dead. So she puts together a band of misfits and goes on a quest to find all of these individuals and make sure that they no longer live. It was 5 stars. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. I'm interested and looking forward to the movie that's coming out, just to see how close to the story they get, and just to see the actual visualization of it up on the screen. I think that's going to be great. It'll be a lot of fun. So next up was another odd card, and that was to read an ebook. For that, I read Court of Nightmares by K.A. Knight. So when I started this book, like the first third of it, I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be a 4-star book. Not quite 5 stars, but it'd be a solid 4. And it's really interesting. I like the characters. It's kind of a modern day world with a gothic twist to it. And there's vampires. That's always fun. And I love the twists that she takes on the vampires. So it's not like they feed on humans. They can, but if they feed on humans for too long, then they basically go mad and lose their minds. So the way they feed for nourishment, for energy, to be full of vitality, they feed on their mate. So the mates feed on each other. Our main character has been rejected by her mate. So you feel this bond that happens, and she feels this happen, and he's a king, and he's got concubines and a whole bunch of other whatever's all around him. And so he rejects her. And she basically goes off the deep end, and not sure how much of it's spoilers. I can't remember what's in the very beginning, so I don't want to say too much just in case it is a spoiler. But she ends up with this group of gentlemen that are trying to make things right. So they find the evil in the world and they dispose of the evil so that it can no longer cause havoc in the world. So she ends up with these guys, and it's a reverse harem. Typically not a trope I enjoy. It's okay. Just harems in general, whatever. Not my thing. And this book it's a little story with the steam. So there is a really good plot, but it is super spicy. You got monster spice, you got vampire spice, it's spicy. So if I'd been born in the 40s, I would have been like, oh my gosh, oh my goodness, and just blushing away because it was super steamy. And I know that's the way the book was supposed to be. It was a book club pick, and I went into it knowing it was going to be a little more than what I wanted, and I didn't want that to bring my star rating down just because it's not my thing. I wanted to base it on the merit of the book itself. But for me, I felt that once we got to the whole like middle chunk of the book. All right, keep getting interrupted. Family wanted breakfast and Walter wanted down. So back to Court of Nightmares. I feel like the story got sacrificed for the spiciness. So some of the, like, I get why a lot of it was there, but overall it sped through the plot and the actual story in order just to put more smut in there that wasn't necessarily needed at that time. And I get that's these kind of stories, that's what people go for. They don't necessarily need the storyline or the plot or whatever, but it was a good one. It was interesting. I wanted to know more about that, and then it just kept getting interrupted. So 3 stars for me. The character development, I think, was good overall. The pacing of the character development was decent. There is some insta-love-y kind of stuff, but I think that somewhat fit with the story or the premise of the book. Because once you make that mate bond, you know, there is somewhat of that insta-love type of thing expected of it. But overall, I think it wasn't for me, so take that with a grain of salt. If you like steamy romances and you don't really care about the pacing of the storyline and the plot that goes with it, then you'd probably love this book. But for me, I would prefer the character development, the storyline, and the plot over the spiciness. So 3 stars. All right, so the next roll was an odd card, and that was to read a classic. And for that, I read The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This was not a book I had to read in high school. I had to read Of Mice and Men, and then my mom found out that there were swear words in there, so I wasn't allowed to finish that book, although I had actually already read the whole thing. So I got to read The Pearl while my classmates all read Of Mice and Men. I got to sit outside the classroom during their discussions and read The Pearl, and then take separate quizzes. So I ended up having to read 2 books. Although The Pearl was really good, I really enjoyed it. Of Mice and Men was good too, but I did not have to read The Catcher in the Rye. So this was my first time reading it, and I think if I had read it in high school, I would have really enjoyed it. But reading it as an adult, the character was just irritating. So we're following Holden, who has basically got himself kicked out of yet another prep school and is not quite sure how his parents are going to react. And it's right before the Christmas holidays. He's basically just got a couple weeks of school, like a week of school left, and he gets kicked out right before it. So he decides he's just going to take what he has, and he is going to spend the next week and just enjoy himself in New York, because he lives in New York City. So he's just going to enjoy himself in New York and then go home when he should have gone home. So his parents won't know, and he'll just go home, and then he can deal with consequences then. I feel like it was written as a stream of consciousness of a 16-year-old as he's dealing with getting kicked out of another prep school, having to tell his parents what's happened, and getting in trouble for that, and wanting to enjoy himself before that happens. I just found it boring. It was somewhat interesting, like just coming from someone else's perspective that's not mine, that did things in school or was a certain way. Like I was a musician in school, so I was that band geek, the choir nerd. I played handbells, and yeah, so I mean, you're popular among your other musicians, but everyone else in school kind of feels like you're a nerd, at least in my time when I was in high school. And so I wasn't the popular one, the jock, or any of that kind of stuff. So it was interesting to see the different perspectives. In part, I found it interesting from the different perspective and just getting inside someone else's brain. And I'm sure if someone read A Week in My Life when I was 16, they would have been like, oh my goodness. Oh, excuse me. So tired. It's all overcast today, so that's not helping with me feeling sleepy. I just want to curl up and take a nap. Anyway, so yeah, they probably would have found me super boring. All this person does is walk around and sing and is silly and whatever else. Overall, I think Colton has a good heart. He loves his little sister and wants to do anything he can for her. But it was just kind of boring for me. I don't know why I'm still talking about this. So yeah, 3.5 stars. I thought the writing style was interesting. I thought it was done well, even though it wasn't my cup of tea. And I could see why people liked it. I was talking to my sister and I was like, so did you read this one? I'm kind of bored. She's like, yeah, me too. But it was her daughter's favorite book in high school. So I think as an adult, you can appreciate it. And if you had gone through similar things, I think you would really enjoy it. And as a kid growing up in high school, so I think you would really enjoy it. You could relate a lot more to it than I can now. So 3.5 stars. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, then I landed on another odd card, which is funny because most of the other months I had all even cards. Now I have all odd cards. And that was to read a middle grade. And for that, I read The Secrets of Winterhouse. And it's the second book in the Winterhouse series by Ben Gooderson. And I really enjoyed it. It was adorable. I think it was a really good sequel to the first book. It has a lot of similar themes throughout. We're back with Elizabeth and Freddie for the Christmas holidays. And again, they have a mystery that they need to solve. There's some danger. It's a lot of similar things from the first book, but that's because we're following the same people. We're still, they defeated that one villain, but there's still more to it, more to the story than what was in the first book. So that's what the second book is, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I had read like big epic fantasies like back to back in June, and so coming into July, this was basically the first book that I read. I think I read it in one day, maybe a day and a half. And it was cute, it was fun, it was lighthearted. I mean, it's got some scary parts to it, It's because it's a mystery, it has a little bit of thriller aspects to it, but it was a lot more lighthearted than what I had been reading. So, and the writing style is super easy to read. As a kid, I would have really enjoyed reading this book series, the whole series. There's one more book in the series, it's a trilogy, and I'm really looking forward to finishing it out. So I would highly recommend it. It's got plot, it's got intrigue, it's got twists and turns, it's got reveals, it's got fun characters, and the world itself is interesting. I mean, it's a current day world, but you have it's the Winterhouse Hotel, and all the history and everything behind it, and it was a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. So my next roll was an even card, and that was to read the first book to read the Shadow Magic series. It's a box, well, it's not really a series, it's a box set which contains the first book in, I think it's 10 different series, might be seven different series. And so you get to read the first book of each of those to see if it's any of those or anything you'd be interested in and wanting to continue. So the first book is Huntress Born, and it's by Amy Easterling, and the cover is kind of fun, so I'll put it up here. This was the Kindle cover because it's the box set, but I'll put the cover to the book itself here. Okay, so there's 6 books in the box set, and it starts with Huntress Born, which is the first book in the Wolf Legacy series, and it's a shapeshifter romance, and they're basically werewolf shapeshifters. And the line that had me really interested and wanting to read this book was that the main character, Ember, is a werewolf baker. Well, I gotta read it now. So my dad was a baker, and he made the most amazing cinnamon rolls and donuts, and yes, we had a bakery for about 5 years or so, and then we ended up moving and he didn't restart that up. Huntress Born, Ember is a werewolf and she is a baker. She lives with her adopted family, which is the werewolf pack that adopted her and her brother. And they own a bakery, and so this is where she learns to bake, and it mainly talks about cupcakes and different types of cupcakes, and just having that knack for knowing you're gonna want one of these, like a lemon or a chocolate or a red velvet, whatever that particular person was. She was able to guess the cupcakes. Ember's brother is missing. So some think he's dead, she thinks he's still alive, and she is determined to find her brother. So she goes off on this quest to find her brother, and she's working kind of a temp job at a bakery in the city where he was last known to be. And as she's searching, she comes across this rogue werewolf pack. I'm still not quite sure what the storyline was behind that, what the plot was. I don't know if the werewolf pack was kind of trying to take over, if they had more males and needed more females, if they wanted to grow. Still not quite clear on that. I don't know if maybe it would go into it a little bit more in the second book, but I feel like the first book kind of wrapped itself up nicely where in that regards. But she runs into this rogue werewolf pack, and it distracts her from finding her brother. I feel like the whole point of the story was her trying to find her brother. Instead, she does all these other things instead of looking for her brother, which is kind of weird. Yeah, the story, I mean, it was only like 243 pages long or something. It's not super long, but it was still fun. I thought it was interesting. And along the way, she ends up being tested in many different ways. So part of it is choosing to look for her brother or protect innocents along the way, and she chooses to protect the innocents. That part I understand. While there's all these distractions, she's getting distracted for good reasons, trying to protect people instead of looking for her brother. I assume that part of the story will continue more in the rest of the series. But this is a really good palate cleanser book. It's a super quick and easy read. I was able to read the audiobook and actually listen to it on the audio. I was able to read the ebook while listening to the audiobook as well, and so made it super quick. But I think the narrator did a really good job on the audiobook. It was interesting enough to continue. 3.5 stars. There are some trigger warnings for this one, so you want to make sure you check those out before you jump in. There's a lot of misogyny, and so basically men dominate. And it does touch on sexual abuse a little bit, so you just know those triggers before you go into the book. And then that was my full TBR for July, and I'm happy to say I did complete it all in July, which was great. So for my year-long readathons, I have a couple that I do. There's 2 that I do. One of them is Buzzwordathon with Books and Lala, and for that we had to read a book that had a weather-related word in the title, and for that I read Best Served Cold, Chili by Joe Abercrombie. And then the other one is A Year in Aeldia, and that is with G at Book Roast. I think it's also called Adventures in Aeldia, and I have 2 characters. And so the first one for Ariel, she had to brew a potion, read when it's dark. And for that I read The Wolf by Leo Caro, which was also a book club pick. And then for Karasu, he had to pocket a scroll of light, so read when it's light outside. And for that he read Secrets of Winterhouse by Ben Guterson. Book clubs. For the J&R Book Club with Joshi Curran, we read Court of Nightmares by K.A. Knight. For the Full Moon Book Club with Jan Agaton, we read The Whispering Dark by Kelly Andrew. And then for the Howling Pack Book Club by The Wild Sasha, we read The Wolf by Leo Carew. And I loved this book. I ended up giving it 5 stars, and I just thought it was so interesting. So you have the Nephilim, you have the Sootherners, and they are off and on at war all the time. The Sootherners want to expand their territory. The Nephilim just want to be left alone and just to do their thing. And when needed, they go out and fight and then come back. So the Sootherners are attacking the Nephilim, and they're trying to get more territory so they can expand and grow. where the Nephilim are defending themselves. Their leader ends up getting killed and his son takes over. His son is like 19, super young, and has not proven himself in battle yet. He ends up calling a retreat, which was the right call. It was what should have happened, but the Nephilim do not retreat. No, they are warriors. They do not retreat. They go into battle. But he knew, Roper, the son, knew that if they stayed, they would basically lose lives for nothing. Nothing gained, and they would just lose their people. So he calls the retreat, and now he's got to save face. He's got to build back up trust and respect with his people. And the rest of the story, this is him trying to do that while still fighting and defeating the Southerners and having to earn his place and show what he's made of and prove himself. So good. So good. I am very interested in continuing the series and reading the second book, which I believe is Spider, and the third book is Cuckoo. I cannot wait to read this book. I don't think enough people are talking about this, and I think they should pick up a copy, see what you think, get the word out, and talk more about this amazing book. And it's part of the Under the Northern Sky trilogy. And then for the Catch-Up Book Club with Becca and the Books, we read Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. And for the Backlist Book Club with Covers with Cassidy, we read Grey Sister, which is the second book in the Book of the Ancestor series by Mark Lawrence. I actually like the second book a lot more than I liked the first book. I think for me, like, I really enjoyed the first book, but I think the second book, Grey Sister, got in a little bit deeper where I wanted it to go. We got a little more information. It just felt like we got more. So the first one was kind of laying the groundwork and helping us to know who the characters are, what the world is like. And the second book, we just got to go in with the plot and the story and the characters, and we kind of knew what was happening. We knew who people were, and we just got to enjoy the story itself, the plots, the intrigue, the twists and turns, the reveals, the character growth, like all of it. I feel like this book had all of that going for it this time, where I thought it was somewhat lacking in the first, just because we had to get to know everybody first. So we've continued to follow Nona as she is at this convent basically for assassins. So it's somewhat of a dark academia book. So now Nona's moved from her first couple years at the convent and this assassin training, and she's moved up into the next tier. We get to see her kind of come into her own, learning more about herself, what she can do, what others are capable of, and what matters to her. And I really enjoyed it. 4.5 stars. Now for Readalongs. So for the Shadowhunter Read-Along with Love Lisa and Darian Reads, we read The Lost Book of the White, which is the second book in the Eldest Curses trilogy, and by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. And this one was interesting. So again, we're following Magnus Bane and Alec, their adopted warlock son, Max. And things have been pretty peaceful for them, other than having to watch over a full of energy child that can also do some magic. Maybe setting the curtains on fire, crawling around on the ceiling, fun things like that. Until a couple of old acquaintances show up for Magnus, looking for the lost book of the White. Oh, and they have a magical sword. And I think they stabbed Magnus in the chest with it. What's gonna happen now? I always enjoy following Magnus and Alex in their storyline because they are just adorable and so heartwarming and just beautiful. But I do feel like the pacing on this one was a little off. It was a little rushed at times. It was a little trudging along at times. And I feel it could have been a little more even keel. Now, I understand you need the times of dialogue and times of action, times of dialogue, times of action, but I feel like when we got those slow times, they went a little too slow, But then when we got to some of the action, it went a little too fast. So I feel like the pacing was off just a little bit for me. I do like the cameos from the gang, you know, Clary and Jace and Simon and Isabel. And, you know, I always love seeing them show up in stories. Sometimes they get a little bit more of a role than others. Sometimes it's just a quick hi, hello, and then they're off the page for good. But this one, they kind of meandered in and out, which was fun. And it fit decently with the storyline as well. It wasn't weirdly unexpected. I think the narrator for the audiobook, I also had the physical book, so I was listening and reading at the same time. I think he did a really good job, although I really didn't like the way he chose to play Simon. I don't know. It was just weird. Not how I typically view Simon or even hear Simon in the other audiobooks, so it was a little off. But I loved how he did Clary. I just thought that was hilarious. It had me cracking up. Next we have Malazan Book of the Fallen Read Along, and we finished Toll the Hounds by Stephen Erickson, which was the 8th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. And only 2 books left of the 10-book series. Very excited. Sad that it'll be ending, but excited to see what happens. And then for the Wheel of Time Read Along with Got a Thing for Things, we read The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan, which is the 4th book in the Wheel of Time series. And I enjoyed this one. There are some parts that I'm still not sure if it's believable enough yet, but we'll see what later books bring. I loved being in Perrin's perspective quite a bit in the book again. Perrin's probably one of my favorite characters. And so I enjoyed being in his perspective and him being able to go back home for a little bit, and what takes place there is really interesting. That's where I'm not sure if everything is completely believable. I think it is, but then I think maybe not. Was that rushed? Was it not? So I have some questions about that section, Perrin's perspective there. Some questions about what's going to happen. But I'm enjoying it. I'm interested. I'm intrigued. I want to see what's going to happen. I'm yawning again. Need more sleep. And then we do get Rand's perspective. We get Matt's perspective, which is nice. The groups are all off in different places. So even though we get perspectives from everybody, it's not the same journey for each of them. We have Matt and Rand's perspectives, and they're journeying together. So we're getting some of the same events that happen in that, but they're not looking at the same things. So that's helpful. And then we have, of course, the girls are off on their own little quest. Min is off doing her thing. I love that we get Min's perspective because she is also one of my favorite characters. I love Lan and Nynaeve if they're together. And then I like Min and I like Perrin. Those are probably my favorite perspectives. So The Shadow Rising, definitely my favorite book so far in the series. And of course, more journeying. I think that's going to be pretty typical throughout the entire series, that there's going to be journeys happening. There's action in this one. There's plot twists. There's intrigue. The world building continues to be amazing. Character building and growth is slow, but there. And I do like if the slow journeying chapters are paired with action chapters, so you're not just like trudging along for half the book before you finally get to some action. There you get the ups and downs, which create a nice even pacing throughout the book. Definitely the best book so far. So for the Cosmere with Elliot Brooks, we had to read Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, and I did finish that one. I read 60% in June, and then the last 40% I did read in July. And 5 stars. Don't know if I need to say much more than the Stormlight Archives. Love it. Love all the characters. I love all the intrigue. The world building is amazing. The magic system is superb. Love all the characters and their growth, the character building. There are going to be choices that I may not agree with that the characters make. The directions they're going to go, may not always agree with them, but that doesn't mean it's something that makes the book not great. I think it fits well with what's happening so far, and I'm interested to see what's going to happen next. Kaladin and Dalinar are still some of my favorites. I like Shallan. I think she's interesting, but not as interesting as some of the other characters. And then lastly, for my read-alongs was Around the Disc in 800 with literary diversions, and reread A Small Gods and Lords and Ladies. And those were both super fun. So Small Gods is in the same world, but it's somewhat of a standalone. Some people say it's a great book to start with. So instead of starting with The Color of Magic, you would start, which is the actual first book in the series. This one's the 13th book, but it makes a good starting point as well. You get introduced to the world, the religious system, and kind of how things came to be. I just think it's very interesting. So you have great gods, you have small gods. So the small gods are the ones that basically people have forgotten and then no longer really worship at all. And so we had a great god who has now kind of woken up and realized, I'm a small god now. I don't like it. Let's fix this. Let's do something else. So basically he has one person that believes in him and that is listening to him and is worshiping him. And he's trying to get this gentleman to then get the word out so he could become a great god again. I mean, of course, we have the very humorous satire that Sir Terry Pratchett is so good at, and an interesting story. Loved it. And Lords and Ladies is probably one of my new favorites. If we follow the witches again, so Granny Weatherwax and Nana Ogg and Margaret Garlic and, you know, all of our favorite witches. We're following them as they have to travel outside of their home to another land to figure out the mystery in order to get things figured out and fixed. And if you think you knew what elves were, this book may change your mind. Next up are Readathons. So I had a little caveat because with June I actually ended up pretty much finishing my entire TBR for June. And if I didn't finish, I wasn't able to participate in any readathons until maybe the end of August. I could look and see if any of my books fit in with the readathon, but I couldn't necessarily plan out books to read for a readathon. And I had finished my entire TBR except for the last 40% of Oathbringer. But with my rules, I have to finish at least 50% of a book. So I have to at least start it. Best if I finish 50%, and then I have to finish that as one of the first books I finish in the next month. And I did that. So I did participate in 2 readathons. Both of them were more ones I didn't pick out books specifically for the readathons. I fit what I had already picked out on my TBR to the readathon. So the first one was the Hunger Games readathon, and that was with Eric at Break Even Books. I'll link his announcement video down below to who the actual creator of the readathon was, because he was just a host for it. And I did end up doing fairly well. I was able to fit quite a few of my books into that, and so I ended up with about 600 points. I think I fit 13 or 14 of my books into the readathon, which was great. If they have this again next year, I will definitely take part because it was a lot of fun. You got to pick what district you wanted to be a part of, and then from there you had reaping prompts like reaping chosen one trope. Train ride features a train or other public transport. Parade features a celebration. So it's all things about the reaping. So the reaping, a train ride, parade, training, interviews, and making allies. And then you have the arena prompts. So into the arena, a book with a reveal or a twist. Find supplies, make a fire, find water, pillage for a weapon, so a weapon on the cover. Fight a mutt, take damage, outlast your competitors, and claim victory, book with crown on the cover. So those were all fun prompts. But then there was also district themed prompts. So you could pick any of the district prompts to read. It didn't necessarily have to be the one you were in. I was in District 5, which is power or the electrical. And that prompt was a book that makes you feel powerful. I didn't actually read one for that, but I did read one for District 6, which involves travel, and that was The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan. District 9 was features great character growth, and for that I read Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. District 12 was Coal Black Cover, and I read The Whispering Dark by Kelly Andrew. I mean, I really could pick just about anything. We also had The Wolf, but I ended up using that for District 2, which was features military or police, and that was The Wolf because there was military on both sides. And then there's quote prompts, so like stay alive, read a book from Hunger Games series, may the odds be ever in your favor, hey catnip, the boy with the bread. And then the last one was character prompts. So you have prompts for Katniss, Peeta, Gale, Haymitch, Effie, and Rue. And I did read one for Peeta, which was a sunset orange color. And for that, I read Toll the Hounds by Steven Erikson. That cover is, I think the coloring in that is beautiful. It is just like the beginning of a sunset or a sunrise. Just the nice different kind of washed out oranges that are in there and yellow, darker yellows. So pretty. And then the other one I took part in was with The Word Nerd, and I'll leave her channel linked below as well. And that's the mid-year reading scramble. And so she had 4 different paths you could take. And the one I chose basically starts with, you start with, it's like a little pyramid kind of thing. So you start at the top. And for me, for this one, it was to read your most recent book. And that was Lore by Alexandra Bracken. And then once I finished that, I could decide if I want to read the shortest book I have or the newest release. So I read the shortest book, and that was Huntress Born by Amy Easterling. And from there, you branch off 2 more times. You can either read your longest book or something on your physical TBR. I went with the longest book, which was Toll the Hounds by Steven Erikson. And then from there, I could either read the next in the series or a book for an abandoned vlog. And I chose next in the series, and I read Lords and Ladies by Terry Pratchett. And then a couple weeks into July, my entire TBR went out the window because I got an ARC copy from Emma Wang for Blood Over Brighthaven. I dropped everything to read this book. I was so excited. So The Sword of Kaigen is one of my absolute favorite books. I love that book. So Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wang. I will link below to, or end up in the cards to the video review I did for this book. Up front, there are a lot of trigger warnings, so be aware, take a look at those before you go in to read it, but it is so worth it. Such a good book. I mean, this is, like I said in my review, this is dark academia done right. So good. Everything that some people were missing from Babel was here. So good. I don't even have the words right now. I just really love this book. I flew through it and I loved every minute of it. I thought it was well thought out. I thought the characters were amazing. I already went into all that. Check out the review video below. So good. Definitely get a copy of Blood Over Brighthaven. The paper book is out. The hardback just came out. The ebook's been out. So find one of those 3 copies, snag it, and give it a read. 5-star, 10s across the board. So good. So yes, so since I got that, this was the path that I chose to read originally. But then I got that one, so it was newest release. So I'm like, well, might as well keep going. So I went to over 50% finished, and of course that was Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. And then we have Highly Anticipated, and that was Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. So I ended up completing 2 of the paths from that readathon, which was unexpected and very fun. I was very excited. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad you were here. And if you've made it this far, leave a red heart emoji in the comments below in honor of Blood Over Brighthaven, as well as Best Served Cold, which both had red on the cover and were 5-star reads for me. So what were your 5-star reads in July? Did you have any? I hope you had at least one. Let me know down in the comments which one it was. And if you've read any of these books, I would love to know your thoughts on them as well. And please like, comment, and subscribe if you want it, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any other videos from me. And until next time, keep reading. Bye!